Uma boa tarde a todos os que se juntam a nós nesta última tarde do 11º Congresso Nacional da Administração Pública. E estamos de volta então com uma entrevista sobre competências de inovação no setor público. Temos connosco Kent Aitken, analista político na Divisão de Governo Aberto e Inovador da OCDE, e temos também a Sofia Figueiredo e o Luís Oriola, que irão assegurar a interpretação para a língua gestual portuguesa. Passo desde já a palavra ao jornalista Carlos Ferreira.
Oh, Carlos, you're on mute.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good afternoon in Portugal. Good morning in the US. I'm in the New York region, more specifically Newark, New Jersey, and I'm going to be with you for the next 30 minutes with my great friend Kent Aitken from OECD. We're going to be discussing innovation competencies in the public sector. Innovation has been a concept that it's always been in the forefront of the public sector, especially since the 1980s, that obviously Portugal is pushing it, but obviously there's still some room for some hesitation, and we're going to be clarifying that. And I would like to start from that point onwards, Kent. So when we talk about innovation, other than us being you in Paris and me in the US, obviously a great sign of innovation, and we're still doing this interview. When it comes to the public sector, what do we truly understand by innovation, and why do you think it is so important?
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you for having me. I think this is a good starting point because innovation is probably an overused term, and it's very broad. It can mean a lot of different things to different people. And at its core, it just means doing something new to the context. And typically we also add in a way that provides value at scale. So it actually means something to people. And I think for the purpose of competencies for public sector, the way that I tend to think about it is it's a structured learning process. So we were increasingly realizing over the last couple of decades just how complex the public sector environment is, and just how complex public policy issues and social needs are, which means that there are really complex cause-effect chains. We can't predict outcomes in advance. We have to try things in the space and have feedback loops to know where we're getting and to adjust over time. And so it's where innovation is not just doing something new, it's doing something new with a set of structures and processes and practices that over the long term reliably guide you to good outcomes, that provide you a bit of a structure for making sure that you're on the right track, that you're understanding your problem properly, and that if you're doing the right thing, you know about it. And so in the public sector, we would tend to see a bit of a skill set around this, where design or facilitation or foresight, experimentation, user research, ethnography, even citizen engagement or data storytelling, they all kind of add up to, I think, somewhat of a common core of innovation in the public sector. But from there, it gets muddier and murkier.
Very good. When it comes to implementing all these changes with time, what are the main challenges, especially some resistance from a previous generation that has always worked a certain way, that it's comfortable working a certain way? What's the best way to eventually go about it? Is it with training and making everybody a part of it? What would you think on that?
That's a really good question. And I think I have to start by going a little bit further on, you talk about training, but it's training for who on what? Because I did talk about a bit of a core skill set, but we can think about it in a few different ways. There's what do leaders and executives need to understand in terms of maybe not being able to run a process, but being able to understand how it fits in strategically. There are the people that are specialists and practitioners that lead the hard skills work. But then there's also people in procurement and finance and budgeting and strategy that need to have a general sense of where innovation fits into a broader picture. And how to enable people working that way. And then there's the question of what do all public servants need to know? And those are all different flavors of innovation and different levels of competency and different sub-skill sets. And I think beyond skill sets, it even gets into just mindsets and ways of thinking. I think there is tension. I think in any administration in any country, we could probably find people that are resistant to change, that are locked into a certain set of ways. It's as much though that there are just different incentives for different people, and there are people that are really passionate about innovation, trying things new, and there are people that are more so driven by immediate demands of the day and the person on the other side of the table for whom they need to deliver a service. And so it's the innovation skills need to be balanced with a sense of strategy and priority and a deep public service ethos and how everything has to work together. And then when we get into your question about what's the way to do it, so the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation has been around for about 4 years, and that is the question that we've been wrestling with for that half a decade. And so there are countries that do training and learning programs that are very targeted for specialists. There are countries that do things that are more lightweight for all public servants, that are more about awareness and understanding. We're increasingly seeing programs for executives on these things. And then there are many other approaches. So Portugal, for instance, has LabX, which is an innovation lab that is designed to guide and steward program and service areas through this process. And in some ways that can take the place of training and culture building. And I think it depends is a terrible, solid answer to a question, but unfortunately it is the only one that is universally true here, which is that it always depends on the context of the organization that's trying to move in this direction. And so what works in one place won't work in another, and what is even considered innovation in one place might not be considered innovation somewhere else. It's always what is the next step for the organization, the context that you're currently sitting in.
Of course. If we go to the OCD website, it's also pretty evident that you guys also take this innovation quite seriously, and there's a few processes that you have. And under this section, a new landscape, you actually are very specific when you say technology is transforming how citizens interact with government. You see a new trend of citizens being more informed. The public's expectations have also increased. Governments need to be able to respond to the challenge, and public organizations need to come up with new ideas, try new approaches, and work new days in new ways. So it's actually a trend not only from within, but also the audience is also expecting that from the government as well. So that's why it's so urgent for there to be structural changes to meet these expectations, correct?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I talked a little bit about the idea of complexity, which for me really is the starting point for why innovation is incredibly important. Because in Canada, we have a saying that, and by a saying, I mean Wayne Gretzky said it, but he said, you should skate to where the puck is going, not to where it is. Which sounds good, but I actually am a little bit worried about it, because that gets us into the idea of forecasting and predicting the future, where a lot of the things that you're describing are about recognizing the fact that we don't know what the future is going to be. And we know that citizens expect more from their governments right now. And we know that technology is changing the world, but we don't know for certain what that world is going to look like in 1, 3, 5 years. None of us knew what the world was going to look like in September of 2020, even 7 months ago. And so instead of skating to where the puck is going, I think the innovation mindset is more about being ready and having lightweight experiments in a number of different plausible directions that the world might go, to be ready for what people need in a range of possible futures.
Very good. So you've worked and you've also provided some consultancy to the Prime Minister in Canada, where you're right now in Paris, very actively working for OECD. Would you like to share some case studies of success that could eventually illustrate, because a lot of these concepts for some people might be vague. Yes, innovation sounds good. Yes, technology is good. But in terms of being specific, in terms of like, it used to be a certain way, this took place, and we implemented a few strategies, and now this is the outcome. And eventually ways to maybe adapt to a Portuguese reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So you referenced my history in Canada. So there I was part of an organization called the Government of Canada's Digital Academy. I previously had done some work on a broader project called Governance in the Digital Age. So a lot of the case studies that I hold most deeply are Canadian. I think the approach that I'm starting to put a lot of stock in is when I started to talk about how there are different roles in government that need different flavors of these skills. We can't look at it as an individual learning journey. It has to be an organizational learning journey. So what we did at the Digital Academy, which was following on some work that you're seeing in not-for-profit groups like Code for Canada, which is part of the global Code for Country X movement, is if you're going to go through training on innovation and design and foresight, then we're also going to make sure that your manager and your executives are coming through the same sort of training so they know how to work with you. They know what skills you're learning, and they can actually create the organizational structure around you that will let you get done what you need to get done. So this is something we've done for digital transformation, and we started to introduce people to the importance of user research and getting a really rich sense of what the citizen experience of service actually is like, and where it fails and how it can be improved. And so when you start to do that sort of what we might call a full stack approach to learning and capacity building, I think that's a lot more effective. And I think it behooves me to provide an example that is not Canadian as well. I think one of the ones that I would look closely at is the way Sweden is doing urban planning right now, which is essentially a really deep and detailed exercise that involves public transit groups and citizens groups that are worried about safety and security, and an intersectional approach of the fact that streets and urban spaces can often be less safe for women and minority populations, and they have different views on how that works. And so they can create this really rich design process where everyone gets not just a chance to put ideas in a suggestion box about what government should do, but to work with designers to create mock-ups and prototypes and 3D digital spaces, and actually over time completely reimagine what a city street might look like and how it could be more environmentally sustainable, more inclusive across the people that need to use streets. And the entire way they go through, they have these artifacts of, so this is what this group came up with, this is what it would look like in practice, and you can go and almost conceptually explore it and walk around it and see where it's going. And so we have, on one hand, the bringing both individual public servants, but also their management structure through training. And on the other hand, you have this incredibly multi-stakeholder inclusive process. And I think those are the sorts of things that are really making the world of innovation click for both the people that are trying to drive it, but also the people on the receiving and service and program side of it that ultimately who are impacted and who benefit from the changes the governments make.
And you see that then, so the goal, it's more and more for this technology or technological advancement to result in something more inclusive for the audiences as well, that could eventually shape or play an active role on these new directions that the public administration and public service is actually going. Is that where you see that it's heading more or less, without trying to predict the future, at least having more or less an idea of where it might be heading to?
No, I think we can call that that's not a trend that we have to predict. I think that's a very natural and almost inevitable result of a fairly massive force that we're seeing, which actually ties back to the fact that we're recognizing the world as being more complex, and the way that we reveal and manage complexity is by embracing it. And so the idea of increased citizen engagement and multi-stakeholder approaches and getting multiple voices into a process in a structured and sensible way is, I think that's inevitably the direction the public sector is going to go in and has to go in, because it's the only thing that can actually make sense of what the lived experience is for people that are on the receiving end of services, so that we don't try sort of one size fits all big experimental policy and then realize through implementation that it's really letting some people down or it failed to account for this. And so citizen engagement, including the use of digital technology, has been booming since the era of the internet, but we're almost getting to a point where we're starting to see the limits of the internet for really rich dialogue. And so in some cases, we're segueing back to more analog approaches. And let's say the OECD just put out a fantastic report called Catching the Deliberative Wave, which is all about really hands-on, face-to-face citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies, where you get a group of people from the citizenship in a room and you get them discussing and making trade-offs and value statements with each other about something that the government should do. And then if I can add another complicating layer to this is obviously what has happened this year. And so right now we are not doing things like that. So now there is, even though we're getting to a point where we're splintering into digital and analog means, now we're getting back to, oh wait, but how do we get the best of that world, but do it all digitally?
Right. And this obviously requires different skill sets by everybody. And what do you think that these emergent skills look like? You know, what do you expect also from these employers in the public sector in a way, or ways to facilitate that process?
Well, generally speaking, a lot of the skills that are driving this innovation or this navigating uncertainty, there aren't enough people with these skill sets to feed the private sector, let alone the public sector, which tends to also, as you said, like there is some resistance. There are some legacy structures, like let's say job classifications or pay scales, that make it more difficult, but not insurmountable, to bring these skills into the public sector. And there I would be talking with the specialist skills such as design, facilitation, foresight, experimentation, and on. And you do need specialists that know those worlds as well. Part of the problem is that some of these fields, and let's say doing digital citizen engagement, is almost by definition relatively new. So you don't have 30-year experts of 10-year fields, just by definition. So a lot of it is porting like skill sets over from a tangential or comparable field and moving them into new spaces. And then there's also the question of fitting these things into the broader structures of government and having leaders that understand where they reach their own limits and where they need to pull in specialized expertise or hire or work with the private sector or academia or NGOs to get what they need out of a process. For the OECD, we have a list of innovation skills that that we see as a bit more for the all public servants to cultivate an innovative mindset, and whether they go deep in one of these areas throughout their career and become one of those experts, or whether they just can understand it and figure out where it fits in their day-to-day work. And this is getting, so some of the things throughout this interview have been Ken Aiken's opinion. This one is us working with the 37 member countries of the OECD to look at what's driving innovation in their countries, what are the emerging key skill sets that we need to focus on. And so there we've dialed it down to 6, which are curiosity and continuous scanning for new approaches that might be of interest, trying new tools and tactics, data literacy being part of an increasingly data literate, but not just the data literacy of the policy and analysis and economics of old, but increasingly making sense of data sets from all kinds of sources and analytics and artificial intelligence, things like that. Third would be user centricity. So that's in its pure form, it's user research and being able to build things in a digital format such that it works, but it's also more so knowing how your work impacts people on the ground. Fourth is iteration, which is a process of experimenting, trying something, getting a feedback loop going and improving it over time. Fifth is storytelling and being able to communicate things wisely and effectively. And the sixth is what we call insurgency, which is a bit of a strange term that may not translate well, but it's about being able to cultivate creative coalitions and think in new ways and provide a bit of a challenge function to your own organization about those long-standing resistances that should be done differently. For a long time, I wrote a blog about public administration in Canada, and the tagline was scheming virtuously, i.e. it is being a little bit creative and sometimes maybe a little bit political and sneaky in trying to achieve the outcomes that you're trying to do it, but doing it in a way that is virtuous and in line with the principles of public service, and doing it in a way that respects the public trust.
Revolving around ethics and public service.
Absolutely.
And yes, we're talking about a lot of the structural changes and training and new skills. And you mentioned something very interesting when it comes to the case study of the Sweden case. What do you also expect, or how can the audience have more of a active role, or play more of an active role, generally speaking, in other countries to eventually facilitate this interaction and conversation with the government and public sector? Would you like to give some feedback on that or some suggestions?
And when you say audience, you mean engaged citizens, civil society?
Engaged citizens, exactly. Yeah. Communication.
I think it is absolutely fair for people to choose to be a part of the process as little as they want. Many people do not want to engage with their government, and in some cases in government, we tend to get a little overzealous about wanting to bring everyone into the process, where often they have other things they want to worry about in their day. But there is a very active civil society in every country. There's amazingly engaged citizens that are really interested in weighing in more and stepping up to the plate. And I think the one thing that we need to be cautious of is that the people that are showing up on our door as government officials that are running citizen engagement processes or design processes that are open, is that is not necessarily everyone. The people that are asking to be part of the process are only a portion of society, and we need to make sure that we are getting the views of everyone, including some people that are less loud, less forthcoming, and in some cases less able. So we need to do the work to make sure that we're being complete. A lot of what we're talking about is when government strikes a process to open the doors. In some cases, you'll have government push through a policy proposal and you'll have a backlash from civil society or citizens groups, or even you will see citizens groups and NGOs spin up really quickly as a response to say, we are not comfortable with how that process is rolling out. And we think this should be a process. We think that people should be involved. And at that point, it is on government to decide whether they adopt that or not. And so for those of us in government, I think it's a really important thing to be not necessarily always a part of your community, because that can be inclusive, but to be actively listening, to have a good sense of where, instead of just creating policy in a vacuum, it is the right time to do an open policy making process.
Very good. We have 4 minutes left, and I would like to share this last topic. I was talking to the Institute of National Administration Institute of Portugal prior to this interview, to also understand a little bit where it stood, because I've been out of Portugal for quite a few years, and it's always good to understand the main issues or challenges that they're facing. And I was told that it's interesting for this change to take place, and going back to the concept and topic of resistance, to end this conversation with this pretty clear notion of, it's something that obviously the previous generation and everybody in the public sector, everybody has to want to embrace this change, right? And has to have the courage to also voice their mind and feel and to give their opinion. It has to be something very inclusive also from within, not only from leadership imposing something that a lot of these employees don't even understand why. It's, I guess, has to be a collective effort to truly take it to a different level. Would you agree? And what would you think that could facilitate more and more people having this notion that we're rolling towards the same direction, and it's our collective responsibility to truly voice our opinions?
That is, I think, the $1 million question, Carlos. It is sometimes very difficult for governments to say, we don't know exactly where we're going, but we have trust in the process that we're going to get to the right place together. And in fact, this year has been probably some of the best examples of even heads of state being able to give an address to their entire populace and say, we don't know what the right answer is, but we're doing everything we can to fix. This is actually getting a trust dividend from people for being able to say that. Where in many cases we love the idea of it being okay to fail and learning from failure, but in practice, you need to show wins all the time. So it does require a commitment from the senior most levels to defend the process and to engender that trust and say, we're going to get there together. But it also requires, it's not just about people trusting government, it is about government genuinely being trustworthy and putting the right resources and commitment in to make sure that when they do go down a route like this, it is backed, they have the right skills in place, they have the right managerial mindset in place so that they don't need to create a winning press release at the end of the day. They can actually follow the process and ultimately, through experimentation and starts and stops and failures and question marks and uncertainty and difficult conversations with stakeholders, get to something that really works for people in the long run. And then once you start showing those successes, then the train starts rolling.
Very good. So innovation is here, innovation competencies in the public sector. It's something that obviously it's a goal that the governments are committed to achieve. And based on this conversation, it's quite clear that the processes that were, in order to achieve these goals, a lot has to come from within at a structural level. It's been a true pleasure talking to you, Kent. I wish you all the best there in Paris. And I would like to also congratulate National Administration Institute for such a lovely event with this 11th Congress of Public Administration. And it's been a pleasure being with you guys. Grande abraço para Portugal e foi prazer este bocadinho aqui convosco, gostei bastante. Espero que tivesse sido também bom para vocês esta partilha de conhecimento também do Kent, que acho que foi particularmente interessante ouvir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to Kent Aitken for enlightening us about the importance of developing innovation skills in the public sector. Thank you so much. Agradecer também, now in Portuguese, agradecer à Sofia Figueiredo que assegurou a interpretação para a língua gestual portuguesa e agradecer ao nosso moderador que tão bem moderou esta temática sobre as competências de inovação no setor público, o Carlos Ferreira. Muito obrigada. E dizer que vamos reiniciar agora com a 7ª mesa redonda já sobre competências e trabalho colaborativo na administração pública, daqui a sensivelmente 10 minutos. Continuem-nos a seguir. Até já. Muito obrigada. Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Muito obrigada.
Obrigado.